can't all agree on a lot in Escape from Tarkov. We have a lot of differences in opinion, but one thing we can all agree on is 12.12 has taken a hit in many people's performance, especially on the Lighthouse map. But don't worry, as I usually do, I'm here to help. You guys seem to love my graphics optimizations and settings videos, so that's exactly what I'm doing today. This video is specifically the settings that I use. Bear in mind I do have a really good system, but I have tested this on multiple systems and it does work really well still. These settings are mainly for picking people out and being able to distinguish players while having the game look good and run smoothly. If you want a pure FPS video to get the most FPS out of your game, that will be coming in a couple of days. So where do we start? Firstly, we're going to start out of the game and just make sure that our graphics drivers and our Windows updates are completely up to date. Do the optional updates as well, because that does help bring all your drivers for your system up to date. I'll also mention while we're here that I'm using Windows 11 as an operating system. You guys might think that's a stupid idea, but I pick my operating system purely for the productivity features and not for gaming. Windows 11 can make you dip a few FPS, but I've noticed it is very negligible, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Pick your operating system based on what you do outside of gaming. Now that's out of the way, let's go ahead and open up the Escape from Tarkov launcher, and then up in the top right you'll see your name and a drop down arrow. Click that drop down arrow and then go towards settings. Once you're in settings, under launcher settings you'll see two options. When I close the launcher window, make sure exit the launcher is selected, and when I launch the game, click exit the launcher completely. Scroll down after this and you'll see game directory. Underneath game directory you'll see temp directory. Just make sure every so often you're cleaning the temp folder. That will free up some resources and give you a few FPS back. Right above that you'll see game directory, and this is where your game is installed. From here just make sure your game is installed on your fastest possible drive. For me it's the C drive, which is an NVMe SSD. If it's not on your fastest drive you can see a reduction in performance and a huge increase in loading times. So make sure you've got an SSD in your system, which in today's day and age is not hard at all. After that, click on that file path and it will open up File Explorer. You'll be able to see from here where the Escape from Tarkov exe file is installed. Once here, just right click on the exe and go to Properties. And then once in here, you'll be able to see a bunch more details about the game. But you're going to want to go into the Compatibility tab up the top, and then once in here, tick Disable Full Screen Optimizations. Once you've done that, make sure that you go to Change High DPI Settings, and then right at the bottom you'll see Override High DPI Scaling Behavior. Tick that, and then underneath you got a drop down, make sure that's selected Application. Hit apply and then OK, and you can close out that window. From here press the start button and type in game mode in the start, and this will bring up game mode settings. Make sure you've got game mode turned on. It has been optimized a hell of a lot lately, and that will give you a great boost in performance while gaming. After this you're just going to want to go into the graphics section, which is system, display, then graphics, and if you scroll down you can see custom options for apps. Make sure Escape from Tarkov.exe is in here, then you can go to options and then just select high performance and it will select the fastest GPU in your system. For me, I've only got a 3090, so it'll pick that anyway. If you can't find it, then you can just go up to the top where it says add an app, click browse and enter the file path where Escape from Tarkov is installed. And then it will add it, and there you go, nice and easy. You've got Escape from Tarkov set to high performance under your system. Finally, we can now go into the game settings. Starting off in the game settings themselves, I have disabled automatic RAM cleaner because I have 128 gigs of RAM in my system. If you have 16 gig or less, maybe turn it on, as it will help with performance and cleaning up those temporary files. I've also ticked only use physical cores, and if you've got a CPU that does multi-threading or hyper-threading, I 100% recommend that you do this as well. Basically, in a CPU you've got a certain amount of cores and a certain amount of threads. Those cores, physical cores, are absolutely fine, but inside each of those cores have multiple different threads, and some of those threads will be physical ones, but some of them will be virtual, also known as logical cores. Having this box unticked will allow your CPU to assign both physical and logical cores together for this game's process, and it won't work well, it will cause your game to underperform. So if you've got a hyper-threading or multi-threading CPU, ticking only use physical cores will make sure that your system only provides physical cores to the game, making it as smooth as possible. I've got my FOV turned all the way up to 75, and that's because I like to see what's going on around me. If I turn the FOV all the way down to 50, not only will I get slightly improved performance in terms of FPS, but I will also be able to see what I'm aiming at a little bigger. It'll appear a little bigger, but that comes at a cost because you won't be able to see what's going on around you so easily, so you might miss someone running out of the corner of your eye, which you wouldn't miss if you were on 75 FOV. Head bobbing is turned all the way down because that makes me feel physically ill and want to die, so let's just get that out of the way. No one likes the head bobbing. Malfunction notifications is turned on, so we know when the gun is malfunctioning. That's pretty obvious, that's cool. And I have ticked preload hideout. So at the start of the game, it will preload your hideout for you, so when you click the hideout button, it will load in quicker. But that means it's stored on cache memory, so if you don't want that and you want a slightly improved performance, untick that and you'll just have to load the hideout each time you want to use it. So if you got this switched off, you'll have to spend longer waiting for the hideout to load, but at the same time, you'll have slightly improved performance while gaming. Moving over to the game tab now, I'm going to run through each setting individually, but if you have any questions, please let me know down below in the comments, and I'll be happy to explain what each setting does a little bit more. So starting off with my screen resolution, I've got this set to my screen's native resolution, and I've set it to full screen for better input latency. I've turned my overall graphics quality all the way down, but I've changed individual settings to my own preference. So texture quality is set to medium. This is a good middle ground for best performance in terms of FPS and good visual textures as well. I've turned up shadow quality all the way to high because they have been reworked with Unity 2019, and you can see people moving a lot easier with higher quality shadows, but this does come at a cost of a little bit of performance. If you find that high is too high for you, then turn this down to medium, but don't go any lower than medium. I've got object LOD quality, which is level of detail quality, set to 2.5. If you turn this down to 2, you might see a pop in the distance, so trees and objects might pop in when you're not that far away from them, which causes quite a jarring experience, but it will improve your performance. But 2.5 is a nice middle ground for FPS and not noticing that pop up so much. Overall visibility is set to just 1000, 400 is way too low, but 1000 is a nice middle ground for the size of the maps that we've got. When I'm sniping maybe on woods and on high points and long points of lighthouse, I may turn this up to 1500, but I don't really need to go any higher than that. Any higher, your game might look a little crisper, but it will tank your performance. I've set my anti-aliasing to TAA high. If this is a bit too demanding on your system, then turn it down to TAA or off. But basically this just reduces the jagged edges of the game itself and most of the objects. If you do turn this down, then be aware that you will start seeing more jagged edges around in certain objects. And from my experience testing this, I have found that PMCs in the distance start to blend in a little bit more to the objects they're standing in front of. When it comes to resampling in terms of gaming graphics, it just means how many pixels are on an image. Resampling up will increase and resampling down will decrease the amount of pixels in the image. In Escape from Tarkov, it means nothing apart from how much FPS you lose, so I've just put this to 1x off. But if you're still struggling with the FPS now, then you can turn the resampling to 0.75 downsampling, and this will reduce the amount of pixels in an image and improve your FPS. Any higher than that, it'll improve how many pixels are in the image, but it won't change how well the game looks, and it will just destroy your FPS. HBAO is used for better higher definition visibility at long ranges, but in terms of how big the maps are at the moment, it isn't really useful and doesn't really do much, so I've turned that off. SSR has been redeveloped with 12.12, giving great reflections in water and puddles. I'm a big fan. I've put this on medium. If you want to turn this off, then it will give you a few FPS back, but I just love the way the water and everything looks with this turned on, so I've got it on medium. And anisotropic filtering is also set to off. Usually in games when you have this on, it will improve the definition of textures, i.e. floor textures and grass textures, but in this it doesn't really do much, so just turn it off and save yourself some FPS. Next up, I've got NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency turned on with boost, and this reduces my input lag on live servers when fighting PMCs and just in general as well. So make sure you've got this on at the very least. On and boost will tank about 5 to 7 FPS, whereas on will tank about 2 to 3. So it's up to you whether you want more FPS and higher input lag, or you want the lower input lag, which I recommend, especially when you're fighting, because it can make the difference, especially with inertia. Now I've got sharpness set to 0.7, basically where it is as default. Before I used to turn this all the way off, and that will help when you're streaming, especially on a one PC setup, and it'll also give you a little bit more FPS back. The way that foliage is rendered in Escape from Tarkov is not ideal, and the sharper it is, basically all it is the same texture layered on top of each other multiple times. So the sharper you have it, then it's just going to be more layers and layers on top of each other, and that will be more to process and therefore lower FPS. But I do like the way the game looks with a little bit of sharpness to it, and it will improve being able to see players at further distances. So I've got it set to 0.7, not too sharp, and not nothing, so everything's blending in at far away distances. For the game FPS limit, I've got that cranked all the way up, and I recommend you do so too. If you cap it any lower, then you could be hindering potential performance from your game when you're in raid. For lobby FPS limit, I've got that set to 60 anyway. That's the highest it will go. Any lower than that, then it'd just look a bit jarring for me. And then after that, we've got a load of tick boxes down the bottom. Personally, I've turned these all off. High quality color you could turn on. It will reduce your FPS, and for me, I will just change post effects settings to give myself a little bit better color, because it doesn't actually affect the game at all. Z-blur just blurs the edges of your screen. Don't think that's very good, especially when you're trying to spot people in the distances and at the corners in your peripheral, so turn that off. Chromatic aberrations do nothing but change your FPS. Noise, why would you have it on? Grass shadows, if you've played any other game with grass shadows enabled, you will see that it's harder to spot people in tall grass and bushes, so if you turn that off, there'll be less shadows for you to deal with, and therefore you'll be able to see people better. MIP streaming is intended for those that have a better CPU than GPU. If you do, then it will send a lot of the processing and rendering to your CPU, freeing up some of your GPU. But although it's not intended, the graphics will reduce in terms of resolution and quality, so you will get an improved FPS, but the quality of your graphics will be a lot lower. For me, obviously with my high-end system, I've got this turned off, but it may be worth playing about and see what you can get. Finally, we got flash indicator, and this is just for NVIDIA low latency basically. If you've got this ticked, every time you click, it will put a small white box on your screen, and this is basically to measure your input lag. For me, I've got this unticked, but if you want to see a little white box appear on the side of your screen, then be my guest. If you want to measure your input latency, then you're probably going to want this on. Simple as. And finally, we've got our post effects settings. If you want to change these about, they're mainly personal preference, so bear that in mind. If you want to change these out and see how the graphics look on the fly, then go into an offline raid, enable post effects in the settings, and then go down to visualize, and you'll be able to see what you're changing happening live, so you can see whether the changes that you're making you actually like or not. Starting off with brightness, I've got this set to -20 because my monitor is a TN panel and therefore quite bright. If you've got an IPS or an OLED panel, then you're going to want this cranked up a little bit because indoor areas can appear really dark. My saturation is set to 20, mainly to give a little bit more diversity in terms of the darker shades, so all of the browns don't mix into one grey palette. You can actually see a definition between the colours. This allows me to spot out people a little bit easier. I've got clarity set to 45. This allows me to see things a little bit further in the distance, and if it's quite a foggy day, you can see a little bit easier in the fog. Colourfulness is set to 35 to give everything a little bit more colour and pop. And I've got Luma Sharpen and Adaptive Sharpen individually set to 15 and 10, giving a little bit more sharpness to the game as well. And my colour grading is set to Chill Wave at 15 intensity. This is actually a really good setting if you want to be able to see in darker areas. It brings everything in the game a little bit darker as a whole, but the darker shades are more defined, meaning you can spot out a silhouette of a person in a dark room, whereas you might not have before. It's quite a good setting, and I've been using this for a couple of wipes now. That's it. That's all my settings and everything that I use as of right now. And of course, I've got VoIP enabled, and so should you, but sound settings, they're completely different to graphics, aren't they? So we won't go into that. But anyway, that's my settings. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and if you did find this helpful, a like's always appreciated. Subscribe for future content, and make sure if you are looking for that boost in FPS to keep an eye on the channel for the next couple of days, because my max FPS guide will be on the channel shortly when I get around to making it. But thank you so much, I love you lots, I'll see you in the next video, goodbye.